Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And Arif, I want to talk to you a little bit about something you and I both read earlier this year. It was in the papers for a while, it was in the news. And that was that Barrie, Ontario had established itself as having the highest rental rates of any municipality in the country. And that ran for a short time. And then I think Toronto surpassed us again, but we're kind of running neck and neck still with the GTA for high rental rates. The other thing that coincides with that, by no coincidence, is the fact that we have one of, if not the lowest rental accommodation rate or vacancy rate in the country as well. This is hard to believe, would you not think, for a city our size?
No, you know what, Mike? I don't think it's hard to believe, and I'll throw in my 3.5 cents worth. When you look at things, we're less than an hour to Toronto if you're driving. Yes, we're a little bit longer if you're on the GO train, perhaps, but we're a short commute, by all standards to the GTA if you're a commuter. Throw into that COVID, where a huge percentage of the population was able to relatively simply transition to working from home. Compound that with the fact that the city of Barrie has the absolute lowest crime rate in the country yet again. So very low crime stats, certainly for any of the more concerning levels of crime. Yes, we know, we all talk about some of the things that disturb us and inconvenience us, and I'm one of those people as well. However, we've got a beautiful city on a beautiful waterfront in close proximity. We've got the bandwidth. We've got more house for the dollar, so to speak, comparatively than the GTA. So no, Mike, all of these things actually seem to make sense. Of course, the nail in the coffin, so to speak, is supply. We've been talking about that for a number of years, Mike, and I think that's what the show's about.
Exactly. We have talked about that for the last 4 years. And yes, Barrie is a magnet. It attracts people near and far of all income brackets. I mean, we have a lot of good social services in this town. There's no shame in stating that fact, that if you are someone who's in need and you're living anywhere in or around Simcoe County, Barrie is the place you're likely to be coming for at least some of those services. We've done a good job with that. And the other side of that is you get a lot of people coming here who are, who need affordable housing. And we just don't have, A, the affordable housing supply, but B, just the overall rental supply in all price ranges. And, the question comes up, are we doing all that needs to be done as a municipality, maybe provincially, federally, and municipally, to ensure that that housing stock catches up with the demand that's there? We've talked on this.
For me, Mike, I think the answer is no. I think the answer is a resounding no. I don't want to steal any thunder from what you've got lined up for the show, and I think we're on the same page. But I would certainly say that there's been a lot of talk and a lot of posturing. It took long enough for local government, both provincially and municipally, to actually tune into this station and actually realize that you can try and dance around the elephant in the room all you want, but at some point the elephant's going to make itself known, and that is
squish
supply.
you.
Yeah, it's going to squish you. I mean, we haven't had a significant housing boom in this city since probably 2006, and then suddenly in the last couple of years, we started to see some increasing inventory, some increasing supply.
Yeah.
But if you are in conversation with any of the developers in the community, in the development community, and I'm not interested in personal opinions, I'm just talking about facts about those who are in the business of creating a living space or living communities. They all say that this city is slow to move things through the process to allow supply to hit the market.
And the process itself is slow. It can be 5 years to 10 years to get shovels in the ground on a development. And oftentimes that is going to have people turn away. They end up passing their properties on to another developer to take on the challenges. And it keeps a lot of people out of the game. Some people just don't have that timeline to work within. If we had a system that allowed a 1 to 3 year process where you checked all the same boxes, but you could do it in a more efficient manner, I have a feeling there'd be a lot more people interested in investing in new home development in our
Yeah,
parks. So
I
we
want to
really
be,
need to do something.
I want to be fair to the city, though. I mean, you've got the two conservation authorities that don't speak to each other, and they're
Yeah,
certainly not unified in their approach. They're not unified in their policy. They're not unified in their pricing. Amazing when you watch what's going on in some of the areas that you wonder where they invented their fees and levies, et cetera. Because they're
yeah,
certainly not out of a manual or out of a playbook. It seems to be whatever they feel like doing. So,
yes,
and yes, I'm being critical, but I'm also being someone who's been actively involved and
sure.
seen the other side of the other side of the equation.
But all those services, you speak of them as separate entities, and one hand doesn't know what the other's doing. They do all have one very significant thing in common. They all work for us. They are all subsidized by us. They all exist to serve us. So us need to do something better to get them harmonized, get them working more efficiently together. And until we do, we'll just see the same old, I think. And
Yeah,
something else
Mike, I
I
mean,
wanted to touch
here's the
on.
thing, though. Hang on. The thing is, on that point, we're going to go to break in just a second. I'm
Sure.
not quite sure. I mean, yes, I agree. They all definitely serve us. However, if you look at their mandates, I mean, they do claim to be stewards of the environment, for example.
Mhm.
And I'm not gonna diminish that. I mean, we certainly have to come to face the reality of climate change.
Yep.
I'm glad we're not talking about global warming as much as we are climate change, and we have seen some severe flooding and ponding and weather events that certainly should cause people to pay attention. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the inefficiencies and the almost seemingly in an intentional delay. And when we
Yeah.
come back from break, Mike, let's go to break. I know you've got something on your mind that you want to talk about, but let's actually talk about the reality of the fact that you're either here to address the concern of affordability, which is directly tied to supply, and let's not talk about anything else, okay?
Mhm.
Because the reality is that you can come up with all sorts of reasons why not to do something. You got to
Yep.
decide at some point that you want to do something. So we do have to go to break, Mike. The floor will be yours when we're back. I think this is a good topic to have some good back and forth on. Stay with us for more of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie, and we're talking about a hot topic. We're talking about housing affordability, a lack of affordable housing, and a lack of affordable rental housing. And all of it, regardless of which side of that equation you're on, comes down to a lack of supply. And before we went to the break, Mike, we were talking about a number of things that sort of catch our attention and
Mhm.
offer us a little bit of opportunity to be dismayed. But it comes down to what, Mike? What is that other thing that
Well,
you wanted to get in there?
there's what's commonly referred to as NIMBYism. There's two things I want to address within that. And one is, yes, we are seeing projects that do go forward. There is development. I don't want the public to think Barrie's shut its doors and nothing's getting built. It is, but it's a hare and a tortoise type of race, or maybe that's the wrong analogy there. It's not happening fast enough. It is a tortoise, and in comparison to the demand. So when we see that new development and it's announced and it's posted to social media, the news story, the comments almost every, if not every time, are predominantly people saying, "Well, this is not affordable housing." And I think people need to understand that if you build the housing for the people who can afford that mid to upper price range, a lot of them are going to be moving from the rental market into the ownership market. That frees up rental accommodation. That helps keep rental prices in check. So even though it may not directly serve that renter who has a budget, the more housing being built is in an indirect way going to attribute to more supply in a better rental market. The other thing I want to talk about there is, and I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, if you'll allow me, Arif, and that is anybody who's owned a home in the Barrie area for 5 years or more has seen their, not their net worth, but at least their assets, home assets increase in value by 2, 3, 4, 100,000, even more. They're sitting well with their investment in their home that they bought 5 or more years ago. And many of these very same people are the ones that are saying, when there's a proposal for multi-unit townhouses or 2-3 story building in their neighborhood on their street, they're the first ones to line up at City Hall, put in a deposition and say, we're going to hell in a handbasket. We can't have this. This is not why I moved here. This will not stand. And I'm sick and tired of hearing that, because they're the very people who have benefited from the housing crisis we have. The renters haven't benefited. They've suffered. Anybody who doesn't own a home, who hopes to own a home, has suffered. Seniors are suffering. Students are suffering. They have benefited. So you know what? It's time for you to pay a little bit towards what you've earned here. You're going to have to give a little bit back. And I'm tired of seeing our city council, not all of them, but many of them, kowtow to their whining and complaining. And too often projects get overturned, or they end up being something completely different than what they were intended to be, if only to placate these NIMBYs. And as long as we keep answering to them, and as long as councillors are more bent on saving those few votes from those people than they are on looking at the bigger problem and crisis here, then it's not going to get solved. And that's the rant.
You're in the industry. You see what's going on. You work with first-time home buyers. You work with people who are going through maybe marital separation. You work with seniors. I know you work with quite an extensive portfolio of clients or potential clients. And I think you said what a lot of other people think. My only offer to my friends at council and our friends there is, don't forget, it's also about the people who are not sitting in the audience with a sign or a deputation to make. It's also the rest of the people who are putting their faith and confidence in you. And there is a reality to that, Mike. I mean, you're absolutely correct. There used to be this story that I've driven up the 400 and now I want to close the 400. I want to shut Barrie off from anybody else thinking about moving to this area.
Well, now that I'm here,
yeah. And so to the question of affordability, I mean, that's always been an interesting one. There's a textbook definition of what is affordable housing when it comes to funding models, when it comes to incentives from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation or the government in general. And that is a very old and outdated version of affordability. But the reality is that if you make the inventory, the price will the pressure will soften, the pressure will lessen. For those people, and I want to get into second suites, but I think we'll save that for the next segment when we come back after the break in a couple of minutes. So let's leave that one alone. But affordability in general, I mean, I don't begrudge anybody who can afford a home, who's got an income. I'm going to come to it from the other side. You talked about NIMBYism, and I'm just going to put a big rubber stamp of ditto on that. I agree with you on virtually everything you said. And it's the same few people who don't seem to tire of that same sort of script that they bring to council. At the end of the day, you either care or you don't about housing affordability. At the end of the day, you either care about your fellow neighbor or potential neighbor and the issue of the next generation of people being able to afford a home, or you don't. And you can't have it both ways. You can't live in the exclusive enclave or the estates of and have affordable housing. So, at the end of the day, we either want to address the issue or we don't. And that comes down to supply. Now, that being said, Mike, you've heard me say it before. I will absolutely say it again unapologetically. Home ownership is not a right. Access to safe and affordable housing should be a right. And that's why we live in Canada and we don't live in some other states or nations. So I think that we need to be careful about blending the two of housing
they get overlapped,
affordability.
but they're two separate things.
Yeah. So if you want to own a home and the market is tough and challenging, then it's up to you, yourself, or myself, to do what it takes to own a home. Recognizing that, of course, everybody's got their story or their challenges, and maybe you need to tap into the system, so be it. But Anyway, that's my rant, Mike. You
Yep.
know, you covered the other one, and I wanted to cover responsibility versus right,
Yep.
as you like
And
to bring up
just,
often.
just for perspective, I mean, yeah, property values have gone up. Qualifying to purchase is tougher. So the bar keeps getting raised. So more and more people are on the lower side of that bar, or forced to choose rental accommodation or stay much longer than they had anticipated within the rental market. And
Yeah.
that drives prices. And we've seen in the last 5 years, as I mentioned, that what their earnings have been for the average homeowner in Barrie. At the same time, the average rental rate for a one-bedroom apartment in Barrie has gone over the past 5 years from around, say, $1,000 or less to easily $1,500 a month.
Yeah,
It's a
Mike,
50% increase. And I don't think any of those people received a 50% pay increase in that time. So people are losing ground.
absolutely not. So there were some solutions that were proposed both provincially and to council that council has considered. Let's go to break real quick. And when we come back, let's explore that, because I think that in itself is a fascinating topic. So stay with us here on Rogers TV for more of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and it is the rant edition of Hitting Home. Mike, we're talking about housing affordability. We're setting a clear delineation between affordable home ownership and housing affordability in the rental accommodation market. And if I was going to put a bow on this episode, it's really going to be, hey, people who make the rules, you either mean it or you don't. Let's get into the topic of second suites, Mike, because obviously
Yes.
they've been making headlines over the summer and even, beyond that.
Well, there's two important elements to that. One is, given the high price of homes, that is the only option for growing numbers, especially young people buying their first home. Without that income coming in each month from a second suite in the home, they're not going to be able to afford that home. So more and more people coming to me. That's the first thing out of their mouth when they're a buyer. They're saying, find us something that either is set up with a second suite or has that potential. It has the access and egress and the bones of the building in order to create that second.
Qualify that a little bit, Mike. Let's talk about that, because there are people who are thinking and being told by financial advisors, et cetera, mortgage agents, brokers, bankers, you name it.
Yeah.
The only way you're going to afford a home is if it has a second suite, whether that's a separate basement apartment, or it's a split with a separate entrance, or it's a separate in-law suite. You can get into home ownership, but you're going to need some supplemental income to help offset your mortgage. That's a reality, right? So these are people who are saying, I could buy a home if.
Yeah. And here's another scenario. You tell me which would be a healthier environment. 50 like some of the most affordable rental is second suite. There's no denying it. Purpose-built rentals are $1,500 and up over $2,000 a month. If you want to get in under that price, you're looking at second suites. So tell me this: which is better for Barrie, having 50 individuals who need rentals, who have low income, having them dispersed throughout the city in second suites, or taking 50 of them and sticking them in a converted hotel on a main street and creating, I don't even want to put a label on it, but create an environment that's susceptible to a lot of negative social things. I'm sorry, that's the path we seem to be taking because it's quick and it's easy, but I think we need to be making second suites more accessible, more affordable. But here we have, within the past year, we had one of our city councilors in the East End, Barrie, push through a bylaw stating that if you're a landlord who owns a home with a second suite in it, you need to apply to the city for a special business license in order to continue with that. In applying for that, you're probably going to have your home totally reassessed and looked at by, and so I think many of those landlords are going to go, I'm out of this. I'm just selling. I'm getting out of here. So that effectively decreased the rental supply. And now most recently we see with, I think they're calling them tiny homes, but they're basically standalone second suites you can build if your property is of a certain size. Coming to City Council tonight, this is Monday night, they're going to try and pass a bylaw change that will see that the setback is increased from, I think it's 3 feet to 9 feet. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, for one of these suites. So basically what the city is doing is they're responding to the people, say, I don't want those in my neighborhood. So instead of the city just coming forward and having the whatever it takes to just say, no, we're not going to do these, they do it in an underhanded way. They tweak the zone that effectively can't be built.
Yeah, they got to decide, right? At some point, they got to decide. You either want it or you don't. I could put that on a loop for the entire show. If you think about it, what makes more sense? It's going to take 3 years to build purpose-built rentals and if not 10, by the time you get your application for rezoning, by the time you get your site plan approval, by the time you actually put the shovels in the ground and you raise $100 million to build this multi-unit building or whatever, however many millions it's going to take, depending on the size and scale, obviously. In the meantime, you could have a bunch of people assisting the market. And as you said, instead of creating ghettos or instead of creating vacuums of people who are at risk of being stereotyped for one thing or another, we could all live in harmony within the neighborhoods, but you can build a second suite within 16 weeks. You can build a whole house within 16 weeks. We know that. That's a fact. That's not my opinion. You can build it within 16 weeks. We have
the existing housing inventory in this city to accommodate everybody.
Add to it, Mike, you're going to have property rent managers. You're going to have a whole bunch of admin to run these large buildings. If you want to talk about waste, or if you want to talk about access to affordable housing, you got to stick a whole bunch of people on and a maintenance crew and elevators maintenance and all of these different things to have a multi-unit. There are heavier carrying costs than people being able to put existing rentals within the community. But to the point of your setbacks, Mike, to the point of your setbacks, that is absolutely ridiculous. You look at the homes that have been built in the last decade plus in this city or any other city, and you've got homes that are property line to property line with barely 2 feet to walk in between. You can't even fit an air conditioner in between the houses. And you're now telling me that these second suites are going to have a 3-meter setback from the property line? You're going to have houses sitting at the second suite sitting in the middle of properties because the actual main house sits out farther to the property line. It's absolutely ridiculous. So this is one of the stupidest things that I've ever heard of. It is an ulterior motive, and they're catering to the people who are making noise instead of doing paying attention to the task at hand.
And to sum up, I started to say is that we do have the existing square footage already. It's built, it's there within this city to accommodate everybody. If we would only support and enable more people to create those second suites, to maintain those second suites, there's our answer right there. We're not going to see the purpose-built rental housing, certainly not to the degree that we need. We need the city, the province, the federal government needs to get behind. There needs to be incentives for people to do this. We need to accommodate the people who that's the only way they're ever going to be able to own is if they have a second suite. And instead of putting up roadblocks and creating these stupid things like the East End Council.
For many people, these are going to be
totally counterproductive.
Yeah, for many people, these are going to be your parents or in-laws anyway. For many people, they're going to be the children or friends of. And for anybody who's saying it's just an opportunity for the greedy to get greedier, I think that's out to lunch. If you create the additional supply, then anybody living in a scenario where they're not enjoying, where they feel they're paying too much, will have the flexibility and the ability to look elsewhere, forcing the rents to come down. Mike, we are absolutely out of time. We have to go, but I think that this was fun. It was great. Yeah, it might be a bit of a bit of attitude towards some of our elected officials, but I truly believe that
the officials in particular, but I just would like all of them to step back and think about their motives.
We're out of time. This was fun. Thanks a lot. We'll see you again on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV, Barrie.